As you all know well, Steve Howard is the founding Secretary-General of the Foundation and has dedicated the last 16 years of his life to ensuring that the Foundation delivers upon its mission. I'll invite Steve to address you in a few minutes, but first want to give you a sense of the here and now. Having been a part of the original team working to create the Foundation, my history with Steve, and with Fergus as founding chairman, and with many of you, is long and has been very rewarding. And having been associated over many years, in one way or another, I've seen that the Foundation has faced many great challenges along the way, along with many extraordinary opportunities. And when I think of the original intent of the Foundation, as referred to in the discussion paper, it seems to me that that task is now more important than ever. The challenge is not a lack of opportunity for us to impact the future of this great nation and the world, but rather how we manage this. And in the past 2 weeks alone, we've had a flurry of activity which have given great momentum to our year, which I'd like to give you a sense of. We were invited to brief the Deputy Prime Minister, then Acting Prime Minister, in relation to our work, to find synergy in how the Foundation might be able to be helpful to the government in the coming year on some of its challenges. We spent time, both Steve and I, in Western Australia at the invitation of the Western Australian Farmers Federation, which is one of the partners of our food work, with the support of one of our key supporters in Coles. We had a terrific program in WA, which included briefing the State Agricultural Minister and his department head, both of which are encouraging the Foundation's focus on the West and are keen to ensure that the Foundation can add value to the formal processes that are running in government, which focus on building an export strategy for the state in relation to food. We also had a very productive series of engagement with peak industry body leaders and the leaders of some of the most impressive operators in the food sector, including CBH, Wellards and the Craig Mostyn Group. In addition, we briefed both the Indonesian and Chinese governments as part of the program, bringing the relevant consul generals into the loop on the work that we've been doing at a national level with both governments and which will continue this year. We've also continued to build and find common interests in this story across other ministerial portfolios and with other state and local governments, as well as some of the regional and global governance structures which we're closely aligned with. And tomorrow we're delighted to kick off the boardroom series for this year by hosting our friend Rod Eddington for a full house luncheon. We're also delighted that we are able to create and have been deeply involved in creating an opportunity for our good friend and long-standing supporter Christine Lagarde, who heads up the IMF, one of the more impressive global figures of this time, and in creating a platform for her with the ABC in which she'll be able to share her views about the role of women in global development, which will take place next month in Sydney and which will involve our members and friends. And we continue to do all of this on the smell of an oily rag. And in an age where organisations like ours are expected to be switched on, wired up, LinkedIn and Twittering away. So I've been asking myself in my time as CEO, how do we build a strong foundation for the next 15 years, which ensures that we can continue to deliver and provide a valuable asset to the community as we go forward? And so perhaps some of you will have some ideas to share with me. So anyway, back to Steve and his wonderful relationship with Fergus. They're quite a team. And what better combination to hand over to now to continue our proceedings. Thank you.
Thank you, Adi, very much indeed. Ed and Adi asked me if I would say a few words in favour of Fergus, and I told Fergus before, as we came in this evening, I'd only tell the truth, and therefore I'd be very brief. But also I was asked to weave in some of the story of the Foundation over the years for the benefit of those of you who've been on the whole or part of the journey, because this is a very rare opportunity to be together as we are tonight. So, if I told you that the story of Australia in the early Federation years, exactly 100 years ago today, was written in significant part by outsiders, you would not necessarily believe me. We know that the founding fathers of a given heritage and gender met and shaped the national frame, our dear old rusty constitution, on a boat on the Hawkesbury River in the 1890s, and away we went from there. Yet I ask you to recall 5 Prime Ministers in succession, that's Prime Ministers 3 to 7, interposed by Alfred Deakin, who kept making comebacks, between the years 1903 and 1923 were outsiders, foreign born. The first of these, albeit making a brief appearance as PM, was John Watson, born in Valparaiso, Chile. Now, some of us in this room, by the way, including Fergus Ryan, our focus tonight, in the warm-up years to the formation of the foundation, visited this lovely port city on the other side of the Pacific more than once as we built the first effective organisational links between Australia and Latin America via Chile. Our subsequent second chairman of our board, Mr David Miles, was on that journey and has played a pivotal role with us ever since. But let me elaborate as a more particular and fantastical political example the role of the outsider in promoting new ways of seeing and doing things simply for the sake of tonight's proceedings. And no, I'm not referring to our 7th Prime Minister, Billy Hughes, Welshman Billy Hughes. I'm referring to the case of the American, or was he the Canadian, bounder who mysteriously turned up on our shores in 1896 going by the name of King O'Malley. Some of you will know that O'Malley was elected to the National Parliament as the member for South Australia, then Tasmania, and as Minister for Home Affairs in the Fisher and then Hughes governments was, at least in part, the founder of the Commonwealth Bank, the Transcontinental Railroad and of Canberra, until he fell out with Billy Hughes over conscription in World War I. It was a spectacular, somewhat controversial career, but he had big vision and he left some great legacies. He died at the ripe old age of 99 in 1953, coincidentally the year that I was born. I remember Zelman Cowan telling me that he himself was born in St Kilda the very day that Alfred Deakin, his idol, died. Dear Zelman felt that something ethereal might have passed between them on the way up and down. I suspect that this indeed did happen, which was a very good thing. How much we valued and miss dear Zelman's beautiful contribution as our founding Advisory Council Chairman and Patron. I didn't have quite the same feeling about myself and King O'Malley, although I was happy enough to play his character on a stage show in my university years. So yes, King O'Malley was real. I tell you this story because I believe it important to acknowledge that Australia's future, then as now, has often been shaped by what I call outsiders, who make their mark but are not necessarily remembered amongst the most famous of names. In many ways, the story of the Global Foundation is not so different from that of King O'Malley, or any number of bounders who've had the audacity to turn up before or after him and to have the temerity to express views that are contrary to the norm. That is, that life in Australia and in the world that surrounds us could and should be quite different from the accepted trends. These contemporary figures are not necessarily wearing Texan 10-gallon hats or promising toilets for ladies on South Australian trains, as King O'Malley did, but in their own time and in their own way, each has made a lasting contribution, often without fanfare, to the shaping and nature of Australia. Sometimes they come together in common cause, contributing to an even bigger picture than the broad canvas they are each painting. Many of these great Australians are in this room tonight. This is the family that is the Global Foundation. Let me single out just a few family members for special attention. Former Deputy Prime Minister Tim Fischer, in September 1997, a year before the foundation formally existed, had the courage to go against his department's advice and backed and led our very first act, the foundation's inaugural dialogue with your counterpart in Brussels, Sir, later Lord Leon Britton, thus transforming Australia-EU relations into a strong and positive force, from which so many benefits have been derived for Australia and for Europe. When former Governor of Victoria and now patron Sir James Gobbo subsequently took us to Bologna for a pivotal private meeting with the incoming European Commission President, Romano Prodi, Sir James was playing on home soil, of course, Mr Prodi welcomed us with open arms, as did his successor in Canberra just a few years ago. Former Governor of Victoria, now patron Dr David de Kretzer, you gave us use of Government House for our Australia Summit in March 1997, an event that launched a global star from relative obscurity. Do you remember her words to Prime Minister John Howard at dinner that night, thanking him for the contributions that his father and grandfather had made to liberating France in World War I, there was not a dry eye in the house. And Christine Lagarde well remembers the support we gave her back then and along her stellar journey since, as she has risen to the top of the global monetary system. As Adi says, we'll honour her again next month, creating a space in which she can broadcast not just to Australia, but to the world. Former Governor of Western Australia and Chairman of the Advisory Council, John Sanderson, you joined me in our first formal call on then new Prime Minister Kevin Rudd, who, having repeatedly thanked you for the brilliant job you did in bringing peace to Cambodia, then absorbed and acted, at least in part, on your advice about bringing together Indigenous and non-Indigenous Australians by visiting the Kimberley, where you and Pat Dodson had prepared such a beautiful path, and where he, Kevin, had never previously set foot. Nevertheless, that journey has only barely begun for mainstream Australia. Former Governor-General and Chairman of the Foundation, Michael Jeffrey, you led one of our most important delegations to China 18 months ago as guests of China's Minister for Climate Change and the Environment, who is now a true friend of the Foundation, with whom we were able to make such good progress at a personal level, as is so often the case in our work, in encouraging China to redouble its efforts to clean up its environment and tackle its crippling pollution problems, and in so doing, drawing upon Australian know-how. And 1 year ago in Jakarta, I had the great privilege of participating in one of the great acts of Australian soft diplomacy when our chairman, Professor Ed Byrne, in his capacity as Vice-Chancellor of Monash University, ceremonially conferred an honorary doctorate on Indonesia's Vice President, Budiono, in a most moving ceremony in the presence of the whole of Indonesia's elite. Ed, is it any wonder that you were awarded Australia's highest honour just a few days ago? And we are so pleased that you've agreed to continue to play a central role for the Foundation when you move to take up your post at King's in London later in the year. I could go on with anecdotes, such as Jane Hemstritch having a shoe stolen when we went to the Taj Mahal on a mission to India, but I won't do so in the interest of time. I do, though, on behalf of all of our members and supporters who cannot be in this room, I want to pay tribute to all of you for your courage, your determination, for a certain madness, as I like to call it, that drives you on when change and progress often seems a lonely and lost cause. It is worth it after all. Here tonight and tomorrow, renewed, under Adi's brilliant leadership, we Maddies can draw a certain strength from the understanding that we are not alone, but rather we are in some way bound together, gathering around a big idea, and that this collective generous spirit is what society at its most thoughtful moments so desperately seeks. Decency, courage, vision, fearlessness, selflessness, integrity, unity. That's why it's such a joy to be together tonight. In this otherwise secular and fragmented world, to celebrate the values that we generally share but rarely articulate, to champion the bright side rather than the dark side that so often undermines human nature, to promote dialogue and unity around universal and not singular values. And that's why it's my great privilege on behalf of all of you in the family that is the Global Foundation to honour the contribution of a man who epitomises the qualities that the Foundation seeks to aspire to, and tonight is installed into our Pantheon as a patron, having served comprehensively from our first years as the inaugural Chairman of the Board and more recently as Chairman of the Advisory Council since May 2011. In fact, the whole story of the Global Foundation, including the snippets I've been talking about, and much more that came before and during the past 15, 16 years, has Fergus Ryan at its core. He has been our constant. Our values are also his values. Decency, courage, vision, fearlessness, selflessness, integrity, unity. I have two brief personal observations I would like to make about Fergus, having worked closely together as friends and colleagues over the past 25 years. The first is the power of the name as a brand. Long before it became fashionable, Fergus, although running a big accounting firm at the time, also had his own personal letterhead, Fergus D. Ryan, on which handwritten notes with gentle advice would be regularly sent to willing recipients, including me. His name is his brand, his reputation. The second observation seems almost a contradiction of the first, but in fact it is not. John Sanderson once said to me that our most important Indigenous painter, Emily, who is sadly no longer with us, changed her painting style as she became very old and blind, from quite precise dots and lines to broad brushstrokes. John observed that, in his view, Emily was consciously painting herself out of the landscape. So it is with Fergus Ryan, that in all he's done, with and for us, it's never been about him. He's always been painting himself out of the landscape by conscious choice. In that respect, Fergus has taught many of us, including me, a heck of a lot, that a greater effect is often achieved by creating and then allowing others to fill the space, as he, the catalyst for change, becomes invisible, even untraceable, cleverly painting himself out of the picture. In a perfect act of symmetry, Fergus has handed over the Advisory Council chairmanship to a fellow Irishman, the Reverend James Hare, no less a formidable figure, also a warrior for truth and values and real outcomes. Fergus will have more to say about James shortly, but let me just add a personal note of congratulations to all concerned for such a brilliant appointment. 3 of our 5 Advisory Council chairs, in fact, were born outside Australia. Fergus and James, as with our beloved Sir Gustav Nossal, were all outsiders. They or their families chose Australia as a place of hope, prosperity and the future for themselves and their descendants. Fergus Ryan is my classic global outsider, having been born in Ireland, worked all over the world, notably in Hong Kong, and then moved to and lived in Australia for most of his adult life, where he became the ultimate insider as well. I'm not going to detail his professional career. We're not farewelling Fergus tonight. Rather, we're simply moving him upstairs in the knowledge that he will bring to bear his formidable talents in our club of patrons, where I know he will devote attention to issues of global vision and governance and the role that the Foundation can play. Other global greats such as Jim Wolfenson in the past and Pascal Lamy today, and at this point I want to acknowledge the contribution made by another patron and former Governor-General, Dr. Peter Hollingworth, who tracked across Europe with us in 2005 to meet with the President of Germany, an old friend, to then be with Pascal Lamy in Geneva against the odds to recruit him to our team. All happily join us on this journey and many more conscripts await. I believe that the Pope is on the top of Fergus's target list. Don't laugh. As an outsider in ideas as well as heritage, Fergus has shown us that it's possible to have a vision, to push the envelope of thinking, to take a community of interest with you, to make a tangible difference in real time and space. I've seen these same characteristics, if not quite the same temperament, in another of our global greats, Sir Gustav Nossal, whom I've also known, loved and worked with over the past 25 years. These guys are simply not afraid, so strong in their belief in the power of ideas, but at the same time so generous in their spirit of inclusiveness. Is it any wonder that Fergus's inner sanctum know him as Fearless Fergus? Friends, please join me in thanking and welcoming Fergus Ryan to speak to us.